This is The World This Weekend. Hello, I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Coming up, friends, rivals, and proteges say farewell to a former NDP leader at his state funeral.
I said I want to be Ed Broadbent when I grow up because you look at Ed's life, you see a life of incredible dedication to his vision for a better world.
Also on the program, the head of the UN pleads with key donors, including Canada, to restore funding to its humanitarian agency in Gaza. And it's the end of an era for our show, The World This Weekend, and the start of a new one. We'll give you all the details. That's later, but first. He's been called the greatest Prime Minister Canada never had. Ed Broadbent led the federal New Democrats for 14 years through 4 elections, bringing the NDP unprecedented electoral success. He died this month at age 87. Today, family, friends, and even former political foes gathered in Ottawa for his state funeral. Tom Perry now on what Ed Broadbent's peers and colleagues had to say about his life and work.
A celebration of a life well lived. Hundreds gathered in Ottawa today to pay tribute to Ed Broadbent, the former NDP leader, a political giant with a common touch, a man known to so many as just Ed.
Ed was an extraordinarily important part of modern Canadian history. He was a tireless campaigner for social justice, and Canada is significantly better for his years of service, both in politics and out of it.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau reflected on Broadbent's life outside today's service, while inside, Algonquin elder Claudette Commanda offered condolences to Broadbent's family and praise for a man who she says dedicated his life to people, community, and country.
May his kindness, his strength, his wisdom and love be remembered, honored, and continue to shine for all Canadians, for all people.
NDP leader Jagmeet Singh remembered how Broadbent welcomed him, the first Sikh to lead the party, how he often sought Broadbent's advice, and how they shared Singh's much-repeated joke that when he grew up, he wanted to be Ed Broadbent.
We will never forget him. And Ed, we won't let you down. And you're still who I want to be when I grow up.
Manitoba's NDP Premier Wab Kinew, the province's first Indigenous Premier, says Broadbent pursued what he calls the politics of joy, seeking to bring people together rather than divide them.
I hope for the sake of our country that more of our leaders speak to us Canadians the way Mr. Broadbent did, by appealing to our better angels. Ed Broadbent, I hope we will see you again.
Diana Bronson worked with Broadbent at Rights and Democracy, the organization dedicated to promoting human rights around the globe, where he served as founding president after stepping down as NDP leader. Broadbent, she says, was a man at ease with everyone.
Whether he was talking to factory workers in Bangkok, to Indigenous leaders in Guatemala, to Fidel Castro, the Dalai Lama, or the receptionist, you felt important.
Broadbent remembered as well for his love of music and quick wit, but above all as a man dedicated to building a better Canada and a better world. An activist, politician, and leader who, at every turn, tried to do good. Tom Perry, CBC News, Ottawa.
The head of the United Nations is urging Canada and other donors to restore funding to a key humanitarian agency in Gaza. That aid was suspended after Israel claimed at least 12 staff members with UNRWA took part in the massacres of October 7th. UN officials say the workers have been fired and a full investigation is underway. Bob Ray is Canada's ambassador to the UN.
UNRWA is the core of all the work that's being done in Gaza to save lives at the moment. We all share in our condemnation of what happened on October 7th. It's unthinkable to think that anyone working for the United Nations would have been involved. But at the same time, we have to recognize the crisis now.
And in Gaza, people are fearing immediate consequences. Our correspondent Chris Brown reports from Jerusalem.
Gaza and its people are being decimated by Israel's military attacks, and now the main humanitarian agency that's been providing food and shelter is under attack itself. Israel claims 12 staff members at UNRWA, the UN Relief and Works Agency, took part in the massacres of October the 7th. It's not clear what evidence Israel has, but media reports quote a released hostage who said she was held in the home of an UNRWA staff member. But whatever evidence Israel shared with Western countries, it was enough to convince key donors, including Canada, to suspend tens of millions of dollars in funding. In Gaza, where the agency is at the epicenter of relief operations, many said they're shocked at the suspension of aid and called it a callous act. UNRWA is the lifeline that feeds Gaza. Nahed Balul told a videographer working for CBC News. They're the only reason why I can find flour today. When they cut off the food and the aid, where am I supposed to get it from? They're punishing everyone for just a few, said Fadi Abu Oda. In the occupied West Bank, where UNRWA also operates, many felt the timing of the funding cuts that came on the same day as the UN's top court refused to drop the genocide case against Israel was not a coincidence. Freezing aid to the agency comes to disrupt the decision of the International Court of Justice, said the Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Shateya. UNRWA was formed 70 years ago to support Palestinians and now their descendants who were displaced when the State of Israel was created. The agency runs schools and hospitals, but many Israelis loathe UNRWA. Inat Wilf is a former Knesset member who's written several books on UNRWA. She claims the education system it funds has taught generations of Palestinians to hate Israel.
It's also very good at pretending that all these things, such as caches of weapons in its schools, people who celebrate the massacre of Jews, and this is clearly not the first, it always pretends as if those are aberrations. Whereas, as they say, this is a feature of the organization. It's not a bug.
What's the evidence of that?
Chris Gunness was the UNRWA spokesperson for 13 years.
They have been working, frankly, heroically for the last 3.5 months. The Canadian government and others who have suspended funding need to understand this is wholly, it's vindictive, it's disproportionate, and it's counterproductive.
26,000 people have been killed in Gaza since the start of Israel's attacks, and the UN says the risk of famine is growing. The Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, said while he's horrified by the accusations, it's imperative the world not make the suffering worse by compromising the agency's operations. Chris Brown, CBC News, Jerusalem.
3 American soldiers have been killed and dozens more injured in a drone attack. The White House says the attack happened at a U.S. base in northeast Jordan, near the border with Syria. It's the first deadly strike in the more than 150 attacks on U.S. forces since the start of the Israel-Hamas war. The Biden administration is blaming Iran-backed militia groups operating in Syria and Iraq. Laura James is a senior Middle East analyst with Oxford Analytica.
It's not necessarily a tipping point into uncontrolled escalation between the United States and Iran, but it's another very dangerous step. The US will have to respond even more strongly than it's done to previous attacks.
President Joe Biden says the U.S. will hold those responsible to account, quote, at a time of its choosing. Former Ottawa Senators player Alex Formenton has been charged by police in London, Ontario. His lawyer confirms he is one of several former Team Canada players facing charges in relation to a sexual assault accusation made in 2018. Sarah Levitt has the details.
Alongside his lawyers, Alex Formenton keeps a serious look on his face as he walks into London Police headquarters. The former NHLer and 2018 Team Canada player showed up today to surrender to police. His lawyer, Dan Brown, says Formenton was charged along with other players in connection with an accusation made in 2018. He wouldn't say just what the charge was. Alex Formenton! Last week, the Globe and Mail reported 5 members of Canada's 2018 World Junior team were told to surrender to police. The group expected to face sexual assault charges tied to allegations dating back to that year. CBC News has not independently verified the report. According to court documents, the alleged victim, known only as EM, said she was sexually assaulted by a group of players. None of the allegations have been proven in court. Bailey Reid is the CEO of the Spark Strategy, an organization which works in sexual violence prevention. She says her first thoughts go to the alleged victim.
You know, I hope she's surrounded by people that are caring for her. And we know that the justice system isn't always kind to survivors of sexual violence. So, I mean, that's my biggest concern.
Reid says, though, it's good to see the case move forward.
It can be really hard for survivors to see justice, and it can be hard for police to bring charges forward.
In 2022, EM sued 8 players, Hockey Canada and the Canadian Hockey League for more than $3.5 million in damages. Hockey Canada settled out of court. This week, 5 players from that team were granted indefinite leaves from their pro clubs, including Formanton. There's no evidence the leave for the other 4 players are connected to the allegations. Today, Formanton's lawyer issued a statement saying, quote, Alex will vigorously defend his innocence and asks that people not rush to judgment without hearing all of the evidence. London police wouldn't comment, only saying more details will be given in a news conference next week. Sarah Levitt, CBC News, Montreal.
Tomorrow, MPs begin a new sitting of Parliament after a 6-week winter break. But that doesn't mean work had completely stopped. The party leaders have spent the downtime crafting the messages they hope will woo voters. JP Tasker takes us through what's to come.
Is everybody in this room ready to axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime?
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is fired up, rallying his caucus before Parliament's return with pointed personal attacks on his main opponent, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
Canadians are hardworking, decent, honorable people. They don't have to live like this. They don't have to give up the things they used to take for granted, like affordable food and homes in safe neighborhoods. They don't have to give up those things for the incompetence and ego of one man.
Blaming Trudeau seems to be going over well with some voters. Data from poll aggregator 338 Canada suggests Poilievre's party has a commanding 13-point lead over the governing Liberals.
You've got a population that's feeling pretty sour about the direction of the country.
David Coletto is the CEO of Abacus Data, one of Ottawa's top polling firms. He sees trouble ahead for the Liberals.
Those who want a change in government and feel comfortable with the alternative has hit an all-time high.
In his own address to Liberal MPs, Trudeau acknowledged the party's in tough.
We're there in the communities. We're there listening to people, understanding their frustrations, their concerns, but also their hopes and dreams for the future.
While also framing the Conservatives as a risky alternative, a party where fringe elements have a seat at the table.
Pierre Poilievre is focused on bringing his party further to the right.
This messaging from both parties will be tested in an upcoming by-election. The Prime Minister has called one for the Toronto area riding of Durham on March 4th. The outcome won't change much. The Liberals are poised to govern until 2025. As long as their agreement with the NDP holds.
Things have gotten worse and worse.
But Trudeau's also getting an earful from his parliamentary partner, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh.
The Liberals and Justin Trudeau are out of touch.
The NDP says they will prop up the Prime Minister if he pushes through a national farmer care program. The Liberals have already missed one deadline. This new parliamentary sitting is their chance to deliver. JP Tasker, CBC News, Ottawa.
A major theme in Pierre Poilievre's speech to his caucus today: crime. One particular crime is on the minds of many Canadians: auto theft. A car gets stolen every few minutes in Canada, according to insurance industry data. And in less than 2 weeks, the federal government will convene a summit bringing together law enforcement and automakers to hammer out solutions. Sarah McMillan tells us what stakeholders say needs to be done to solve the car theft crisis.
Samantha Sinella's Jeep was only in her Toronto driveway a few days before it was gone.
I think on day 4 it was stolen.
Luckily for her, it was found thanks to a tracking system. When she got her next car, another Jeep, getting a tracking system wasn't a choice. It was required by her insurance company.
So I got a letter saying if you don't get the tag system installed, it's a $500 premium on your insurance when it renews.
It's a response to a rise in auto thefts across Canada. According to Statistics Canada, car thefts have increased in nearly every province.
It has really skyrocketed.
Brian Gast is the Vice President of Investigative Services at Equité Association, which helps insurance agencies fight fraud. The Insurance Bureau of Canada says insurance claims paid out for stolen vehicles topped $1 billion in 2022. Gast says automakers should be installing anti-theft technology like tracking devices on the assembly line.
Really, it's building a vehicle and designing a vehicle with the technology and the effectiveness to prevent theft is really the key.
In 2007, Transport Canada made anti-theft immobilization devices mandatory on all new vehicles in Canada.
For the years that followed that, the numbers of theft within Canada dropped in half, so it was extremely effective. Unfortunately, that standard has not been updated or modernized.
We asked Transport Canada if updating those requirements is on the table, but we've not heard back. But auto industry groups say technology alone won't solve the problem.
Any new standard that's put in place, the thieves will be 2 steps behind, and we'll, give it 6 months, give it a year, 2 years, they will crack that code too, and we'll be no further ahead.
David Adams is the president of Global Automakers of Canada. He argues the focus should instead be on our ports, where many stolen cars are loaded onto ships and sent abroad.
It's not just an auto theft issue. We would say it's an organized crime issue.
These issues will be front and center next month when the federal government holds its national summit on combating auto theft. Sarah McMillan, CBC News, Toronto.
It is uncertain times for international students in this country. This week, Ottawa announced a plan to limit the number of study permits issued. That'll result in significant lost revenue for colleges and universities. As Deanna Sumanak-Johnson reports, there are questions about how those institutions will make up the losses.
Many of our members from across the country have sent me emails and texts saying that they're stressed, they're sick to their stomachs.
As an organizer with a group, Migrant Students United, Saram Rao is used to helping international students in stressful situations. But after the federal announcement earlier this week, her phone has been ringing off the hook.
And one of the decisions that were made was to separate families of international students who are studying at the college and undergraduate levels. And families deserve to be together.
The government plans to put a cap on the number of international students Canada can accept over the next 2 years. It was presented as a measure to regulate the booming, sometimes exploitative practice of schools recruiting foreign students whose high tuitions fill their coffers. But many fear that in the short term at least, the measure will affect both international and domestic students.
I stopped dead in my tracks. I was like, you have got to be kidding me.
Vicky Kwao is an international student from Ghana studying at Memorial University's Granville campus. International students already pay multiple times what a domestic student pays, and Kwao fears her already steep fees could increase significantly because there's no limit on what schools can charge international students.
The money's going to come from somewhere else. So they turn around and put that cost on students.
That question, where will the money come from with fewer foreign students enrolled, troubles Dale McCartney. He's a professor at the University of the Fraser Valley in BC, specializing in Canadian policy on international students. He says there's a possibility that programs that take in a lot of them could face cuts.
So it would mean like having to move away from tenure track faculty to more sessionals or contract faculty, reducing hiring and cutting costs in other ways. But it would also possibly mean removal of some of these programs.
And then there are impacts that can't be measured in dollars and cents. Migrant student advocate Saram Rao says the language around foreign students taking away housing from Canadians is damaging and not reflective of Canada's campuses, where domestic and international students study, work, and share housing together.
I think we're already seeing that some people are hearing a lot of populist and rhetoric that it's somehow immigrants or international students who are responsible for the housing crisis or for the larger affordability crisis.
As far as colleges and universities are concerned, a lot still remains unclear about how these cuts will be implemented, something that's for provinces to decide. The Government of Ontario said it'll press pause on new public-private partnership colleges, and BC is slated to announce new measures next week that will crack down on diploma mills accused of exploiting international students. Deanna Sumanak-Johnson, CBC News, Toronto.
Fort Smith, Northwest Territories, is a tightly knit community nestled near the border with Alberta. Now the entire town is in mourning after a charter plane transporting workers to a diamond mine crashed shortly after takeoff this week, killing 6 people. Juanita Taylor tells us how people in Fort Smith are supporting one another.
The bells at St. John's Anglican Church in Fort Smith ring for 6 minutes every morning for the 6 lives lost. A somber sound for the somber mood being felt by an entire community. Diana Carroll is the town's deputy mayor.
Everybody knows everybody in Fort Smith, and we all have connections. It's just really hard right now for the community.
As friends and family from out of town start arriving in Fort Smith, the community prepares. Meals are being made, cots are being provided. The day after the crash, a vigil was held. About 100 people packed the pews at St. Joseph's Cathedral. President of the Fort Smith Métis Local, Alan Herron.
It's sad. It's really sad. All the words in the world aren't going to bring these young people back that we've lost.
The chief of Salt River First Nation, Brad Laviolette, was also at the vigil.
It was just so devastating. Everywhere I go, people are crying. We've got a lot of families are hurting right now. Like, we gotta stand by and show them love and support. And we as a community, we will do that.
Sometime after the crash, emergency responders mobilized, including the Canadian Rangers. When they saw smoke, they feared the worst. Gord Rothney was part of the team to respond by snowmobile.
It's difficult for me to talk about because there's me as a community member and a human being, and there's me as a first responder. But, I went in with optimism. I wanted to bring everyone home.
Towns like Fort Smith are reliant on airplanes for everything from transportation to getting mail and groceries, which is one reason why aircraft tragedies hit so hard. Dennis Bevington knows that all too well. He is a former member of Parliament and mayor of Fort Smith.
Everybody was doing something to support their families, to make a living, to support the northern economy there. This is a kind of tragedy that could have played out in many of our communities.
The airplane is now a tangled mess of debris on the snowy tundra just over a kilometer west of Fort Smith. Photos released by the Transportation Safety Board Thursday show the magnitude of the impact, saying it erupted into flames when it crashed shortly after takeoff. It was registered to Northwestern Air Lease, a family-owned and operated airline based in the town. Known for their generosity and loyalty to the North and for its safety record, some from the Northwestern Air Lease family were the first to light candles at the vigil to honor lives lost. Juanita Taylor, CBC News, Yellowknife.
The first Grand Slam tennis tournament of the year wrapped up today in Melbourne with a new Australian Open champion. 22-year-old Italian Jannik Sinner took the title, winning a grueling 5-set match against a much more seasoned opponent. For more on that and all the action at this year's Australian Open, I spoke to freelance reporter Ed Kleiman. So, Ed, let's start with today's game, the men's singles, and what a win for Jannik Sinner in his first Grand Slam title. Can you take us through his incredible rise, how he got here, and who he had to defeat along the way?
Yeah, so Sinner is just a great story, Stephanie. As a youngster, he was an outstanding athlete in northern Italy, a competitive skier who had to choose between tennis and skiing at the age of 13, and wisely chose tennis because he felt there was a much safer sport, no injuries to worry about. And, you know, he just, as a teenager, had a game that everybody had their eye on, this easy power. And he rose through the ranks in the juniors quickly. And when he turned pro, the thought was, along with Carlos Alcaraz, this is a guy to watch. And I had the pleasure of watching him in Toronto up close, and I could see the power, the precision, the calmness with him, both on the court competing and practicing. And he went on to win Toronto. He won it easily. And that was a signal that he's here to stay. And at the Davis Cup at the end of the year, he defeated Novak Djokovic, not once, but twice in one day in singles and doubles to lead Italy to their first Davis Cup title in 50 years. He carried that form into the Australian Open. He blew through the early rounds. He set up a showdown with none other than Djokovic in the semifinals. Djokovic having been in the semifinals 10 times and never lost once. Well, once again, he got steamrolled by Jannik Sinner. It was so impressive. He came into the final a heavy favorite against Daniil Medvedev. Medvedev threw him a curveball, really got him off his game, took the first 2 sets, but Sinner steadied himself and powered through Medvedev the last 3 sets. A deserving champion, and I'm going to predict he's going to win a number of more Grand Slam titles, and we're in for a great rivalry between him and Carlos Alcaraz as we finally see the transition from the Federer-Nadal-Djokovic era to a new era. This was the first final in Grand Slam tennis that did not have Federer, Nadal, or Djokovic in it since all the way back in 2005.
Wow. It's really hard to understate how much the Australian Open was Djokovic's tournament. Like, he dominated this thing, and then he just wasn't even near the final. Do you think this is the end of that era of those big three?
I think we're at maybe the beginning of the end. How quickly it comes? Well, I think Djokovic is so motivated to prove that he is going to stick in there, despite the fact that he's coming up soon on 37, that he still wants to show, no, Jannik Sinner, Carlos Alcaraz, it's not your time yet. They're super motivated to tell him, no, it's time for you to leave the throne. And I think we're just kind of in that, who knows? If I had to predict, I think Sinner and Alcaraz are going to start dominating sooner rather than later. When we look ahead to the next Grand Slam in Paris, the French Open, I think we're going to learn a lot on where this sport is going.
Wow, feels like we're at such a turning point right now. Really exciting to watch. Okay, let's look at the women's. A bit more expected on that side, right? With Aryna Sabalenka winning there.
Stephanie, Aryna Sabalenka came through as expected, dominating this tournament, dominating from the start right through to the end, including the final. A really easy win, actually. And a couple of interesting stories about her. In contrast to looking like she's so dominant and everything happening so easily, it wasn't always that way for her. When she first came up, she was really powerful. Everyone was intimidated by her strokes, but she had emotional problems on the court. She had serving difficulties. She got way too nervous. Well, she figured all that out. She went over and got some specialists to come in and analyze her serve biomechanically, and she fixed it, and she got calm, and to reach #1 in the world by year end. Well, that's now in striking distance. She's going to go after the #1 ranking. She's up really close now. She could get it by the end of the year. So definitely watch Aryna Sabalenka between now and year end.
Wow, incredible storylines for her, for sure. Thank you so much, Ed.
Thanks, Stephanie.
That's freelance reporter Ed Kleiman. Now that's a theme song that has it all. Are those bongos? That was the original theme for this program, The World This Weekend, when it debuted on September 10th, 1994. Back then, it was host Bernie McNamee guiding listeners through the day's top stories.
Coming up in the next half hour, the Pope talks peace in Croatia, calling himself an unarmed emissary of evangelism.
The show had certain hallmarks, an arts section, a sports section that on that day was about tennis. But instead of Jannik Sinner and Aryna Sabalenka, it featured Andre Agassi and Steffi Graf. The tone of the show was distinct, a little more relaxed, more conversational than its weekday counterpart. McNamee was actually quoted at the time as saying, "It's like The World at 6, but with a sweater and a glass of wine." Today, we here at The World This Weekend still aim to bring you the day's most important news and analysis from CBC reporters around the world. And also some of the surprising and fun stuff, that weekend energy. That won't change. But our name is. We're teaming up with our colleagues at The World at 6, and as of Monday, we will all go by Your World Tonight. You'll still find us here on CBC Radio at the usual time, but we'll also have a new podcast version that you can listen to online anytime. As we launch into the future, we tip our hat to the many CBC journalists who have made this program what it is over the past 30 years. And of course, as always, to you, our listeners. We're excited to embark on this next chapter together. So, for the last time, this has been The World This Weekend. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Thank you for listening. Now let's hear some more of those bongos.